Welcome to our first Ofcom webinar on the Online Safety Act. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars on the Online Safety Act and on our illegal harms consultation, which was published just over a month ago. So this first one will be an overview of the Act and our approach and the key areas that we're consulting on at the moment. We'll have a second session in the new year, focusing on the risk assessment duties and our draft risk assessment guidance. And then we'll have a third one shortly after that, again in the new year, focused on codes of practice and the measures that we're recommending online platforms take to tackle illegal content. So I've got a panel of from our policy team here today. They're going to walk us through the presentation for about half an hour, 35 minutes. And then we've left plenty of time for your questions. We've received a few in advance. And then we'd love to have your feedback after the session as well. And we'll be sending out a feedback form. You can sign up for further updates from us and let us know what you found useful or less useful about today. So I think that's enough introduction. I'm going to hand over to get us started today. So
thanks very much, and thanks to you all for joining today. It's great to see so many people on this call. And I wanted to start the session just to contextualise things by giving a high-level view of the Online Safety Act, what it's about, our plans for delivering our new responsibilities under the Act, and how this consultation on illegal harms fits into those sort of plans for mobilising the new regulatory framework. So to start off on the Act then, and at its core, the Online Safety Act imposes a duty of care on online platforms, in essence, to take steps to protect their users from harm, and makes Ofcom the regulator responsible for ensuring that platforms are fulfilling their obligation. It's really important to stress, though, that the new regulations are not content regulation, so they're quite distinct from what we do in the broadcast space, for example. We won't be making judgments about or telling platforms to take down particular individual bits of content or individual accounts, and the Act doesn't empower us to do that. Rather, consistent with the sort of provisions in the Act, what we'll in essence be looking for platforms to do is 3 things. So firstly, we want all companies in scope of the Act to do a thorough assessment of the risks of harm occurring on the platforms they run, and to put in place strong governance measures to manage the risk of harm. Secondly, we want firms to put in place systems and processes to mitigate the risks that they identify in their risk assessment. For example, we set out in our consultation that we want platforms that have a high risk of child sexual abuse material occurring on them to deploy automated tools to detect and remove this content. And finally, we want the largest firms to give users choice by providing them with tools to control the content they see and control who they interact with. And we hope that if in-scope services do these 3 things, that will engender trust both in the services themselves and in the sort of regulatory regime. Now, it's important to stress that related to these points, that the presence of harmful content on a service isn't necessarily a sign of non-compliance with the Act. We recognise that no systems and processes are perfect. If a service has taken all proportionate steps and put in place all proportionate processes to address the risk of harm, but some harmful content remains on the platform nonetheless, then it would be compliant. The acid test is whether a service has taken proportionate measures to mitigate risk. We're not expecting all harmful content to be picked up and removed. Also important to stress that the Act focuses squarely on illegal content such as child sexual exploitation and abuse, grooming, fraud and terrorism, as well as ensuring that children are protected from certain types of harmful content such as pornography and pro-suicide content, all of which are listed in the Act. So platforms will need to focus their risk assessments and mitigation measures very much on illegal content and on the harms to children defined in the Act. The Act doesn't empower us to force platforms to stop adults from disseminating or viewing lawful content, however harmful that may be. So, this is not about restricting legal speech online. I think it's fair to say the scope of the regulations is very broad. In essence, three broad types of service are in scope of the provisions of the Act. So firstly, any online services which enable users to share content or contact or interact with one another online, including social media services, but also online messaging services are in scope. Secondly, search services are in scope, so search engines. And thirdly, publishers of pornographic content online are in scope of the Act. And services which fall into one of these three categories are in scope if their websites and apps are accessible to UK users, regardless of where they're domiciled in the world. So the reach of the regulations is sort of international and vast, really. It's hard to be certain, but we estimate that over 100,000 services could be in scope of the Act, ranging from big tech through to small startups. And that means that our regulatory approach will need to sort of be flexible and tailored so that we can proportionately regulate services both large and small. This slide sets out the how we're going to be mobilising the new regulations. Effectively, what it sets out is that there are three sort of overlapping phases to our approach to and plan for mobilising the regulatory regime. The first phase focuses on illegal harms such as child sexual abuse, grooming, fraud, and hate speech. The consultation that it sets out our proposals for the illegal harms part of the regulatory regime, and we plan to follow up the statement we published in November, the consultation that we published in November, with a regulatory statement in about a year's time, finalising our codes and guidance in respect of illegal harms. So that's the sort of first phase, focused on illegal harms. Started with the consultation we published in November, and will broadly conclude when we publish a regulatory statement in around a year's time. The second phase of our work to mobilise the new regulations focuses on protecting children from harms such as pornography and suicide and self-harm and eating disorder content. We started this phase of the work just last week by publishing a consultation on age verification on adult services. We'll continue our work in this area by publishing a wider consultation on harms to children in spring 2024, and we expect to follow that up with a statement around the year later. So that's the second phase of our work. It overlaps with the first phase, and it's focused on protection of children. Now, today we're really going to be dwelling on this first row, the first phase of the process. The final phase of our work to mobilise the new regime involves us issuing guidance about additional duties the Act imposes on some of the largest and riskiest services to enforce their terms and conditions consistently and provide users with tools to customise their online experience. And we'll really start this phase of setting up this part of the regulatory regime in earnest in early 2025 when we publish a consultation on those duties. So those are the sort of three blocks of activity: illegal harms, protection of children, and the additional duties on the largest and riskiest services. There are a couple of things I just wanted to say about about how we approached the consultation we published in November, and there are really two aspects of our approach I'd like to highlight. So, firstly, we've taken very much an iterative approach to the to our work. So, given the urgency of the challenge that we face in relation to online harms, we took a call to get out of the blocks quickly and publish our first consultation more or less as soon as the the Online Safety Act achieved royal assent and became law. So we did all of the preparatory work for the first consultation while the Act was passing through Parliament. And because we didn't have information gathering powers in relation to online safety during this period, there were some limits to how much evidence we could gather in this time frame. But rather than delaying the consultation so we could assemble more evidence and include more measures, like more proposals in the document, we decided to pursue an iterative approach where we used the consultation to make an initial set of proposals, focusing on the measures that we feel we can robustly evidence at this point in time, and then update guidance documents iteratively over time as our evidence base grows. So in effect, we were kind of trading off speed against comprehensiveness. We have put out what we think are a good set of proposals, but there are some things that we've consciously decided to leave for later in order to enable us to move quickly with this first consultation. And we think that is the right approach. We don't think it would have been right to sort of delay by a year, for example, and put more in the document, because ultimately that would have delayed the point at which the first protections for users come into play, which wouldn't have been desirable given all of the research we see on the prevalence and impact of harm online. I think it's important to bear that contextual point in mind when you read the consultation. The second point I'd make about our approach is that we've tried to make proportionality a golden thread running through the document. So all of the measures we've done a careful impact assessment on, with a view to ensuring that they are proportionate, and we've also been tailored. So we've tried to pitch the most onerous measures in the document at the sort of largest and highest risk services, and minimise the regulatory burden on low risk services. And again, ensuring that we're acting proportionally in that way, I think is really important to us philosophically. Anyway, I'm going to stop there.
Okay, so just to note, as mentioned, this is our first large consultation within the regime. It focuses on illegal harms, so it's noted. This includes CSEA, fraud, terror offences, and also foreign interference, for example. We feel it's a very thorough piece of work, and we think it needs to be. But we'll also focus on this question of accessibility, which is why we've created a number of materials, including our chapter summaries and our consultation at a glance summary. And that's also why we're here to talk to you today. So to help you navigate our consultation, I'm going to talk through some of the key components. So starting right at the top and then working down. So we have volume 1, which is really the context for our review. It includes an exec summary, which sets out what we hope to achieve through our consultation. It also provides some context for our powers. It includes a sort of a market context chapter, which sets out the services we are likely to regulate and the sectors. And it also includes an introductory chapter, which explains to you how to navigate the document. Within volume 2, this is the evidence that we've amassed, and quite a bit of evidence on that, on the causes and impacts of harm online. Our volume 3 includes sort of our introductory thoughts on our risk assessment guidance. It includes record keeping and review guidance, and also some of our governance measures. Volume 4 is our codes of practice. So these are in essence the measures services should take to mitigate the risk of illegal harm. Volume 5 is our ICJG, Illegal Contents Judgment Guidance, which provides some guidance on how services should identify illegal content. And finally, volume 6 includes some of our sort of wider guidance on how we approach enforcement, our information gathering powers, and also how we intend to engage with our supervised services. Just to note, we have also on top of that a number of annexes. Some of those will help services engage with the consultation. Others will actually include like our draft guidance and codes. And finally, there are a few annexes that provide a bit of additional context to the proposals we've set out in our consultation. I'll now go through each substantive part of the document. So starting with volume 2, which includes our register of risks. So as noted, this is the evidence that we've put together over the last few years in the cause and impacts of harm online. I think we're the first regulator globally to do this work, and as such, it should be a useful resource to everyone. It includes both our own research and research from third parties, so it's fairly comprehensive on that level. Some of the evidence shows that illegal harm is pretty widespread. It affects a wide cross-section of society and potentially over indexes for certain vulnerable groups. There are factors that are really important in this, including the service type, so social media services, for example, functionalities, so things like file sharing, and user groups. So, for example, if your service is predominantly used by children, all these things can affect the risk profile for particular services. So as mentioned, volume 3 includes our risk assessment guidance. So this explains to services how to do a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. It is, from our perspective, based on what we think is industry best practice. It includes a 4-step process that services should consider when doing their own risk assessments. So starting with understanding the harm, moving on to undertaking that risk assessment process, then deciding on which measures you need to take to address those risks, recording your actions there, and then finally, taking those actions and reporting them to your governance board, monitoring the performance against them, and then obviously redoing a risk assessment potentially within a 12-month window. So I'm not going to say a hell of a lot more of that because we have that deep dive in Jan, but just to know that's obviously an important part of this volume. As mentioned, it also includes some of our thinking behind the record keeping and review guidance, which really tells services, how they should record the actions they take and when they should review those actions, and our governance measures, which include, for example, for all services, having a senior member on their highest governance board who is responsible for compliance with the illegal content safety duties. Our volume 4, which really sets out codes of practice. So this is a particularly meaty part of the consultation. And as mentioned, it summarizes the actions services can take to mitigate the risks of illegal harm. We have, I think, 62 measures applicable to, so a portion applicable to user and a portion applicable to search services, so quite a few measures there. This is to note that the measures are recommendations, they're not binding on services, so services can choose to do those measures. They can also choose to take alternative measures to address illegal harm. So if they do all the measures that are applicable to them, they are deemed compliant with their safety duties, which is a potential benefit of doing that. The measures are broken down into cross-cutting measures, which affect all illegal harm. So these include, for example, swiftly taking down illegal content or clear terms of service or easy to use reporting and complaints functions. You can see how those factors can affect all illegal harm. And then there are measures that are harm specific. So they are there to tackle specific issues with illegal harm. These can include, for example, CSAM hash matching, which is obviously helping to detect images of CSAM online and getting them off the platform, CSAM URL detection, and also like our suite of grooming measures, which are there to tackle grooming. We also have a separate deep dive in January to go into that in more detail. So this is, this is really our thinking, sets out a bit of our thinking behind the illegal contents judgment guidance. And this, as I mentioned, helps services determine whether a piece of content is illegal or not. I think the key point to land here is that services do not necessarily need to use this guidance. If their terms of service is inclusive of all illegal content in the UK, there's no requirement there. And in practical terms, we expect that most services will tend to use their terms of service, but this guidance can be a useful guide nonetheless. And I think that basically is it for me. So I'm now going to hand over who will talk about how you can engage with the consultation.
Great. So firstly, just a bit in general about Ofcom consultations. So as a public body, Ofcom consults on the decisions it makes. This makes sure that those affected by any proposals have the opportunity to present their view. It's also a way for us to gather evidence and refine our decision making. We usually publish responses to consultations on our website during and after the consultation period. so anyone interested can see other people's views. After the consultation, we'll make our decisions and publish a statement explaining what we're going to do and why, and showing how these responses help shape these decisions. And then finally, and importantly, because we're an evidence-based regulator, in responding to the consultation, it's really helpful if stakeholders can provide the evidence and reasoning to support their views as well. We move on to the next slide. Thanks. So in terms of how to navigate the proposals in the document, so as I've mentioned already, it's really important that our document is thorough and contains details on all our proposals, but they must also be accessible to the full range of our stakeholders. So we've produced some summary materials to help stakeholders navigate our document, as Adam mentioned. So you can see there, we've got an at-a-glance document, which gives a summary of the proposals and who they apply to. We've also got a summary of each chapter, which is slightly longer. And then we've also got our quick guide to the risk assessments and codes. And all these links will be sent to you in the follow-up email after this event, so don't worry about that, you'll have everything. And then, as Adam mentioned as well, for the full detail, we've got the 6 volumes of the document, which has the proposals in full. And the annexes, we've got the drafts of the first codes of practice, the risk assessment guidance, and other guidance as well. Then in terms of the wider regime, we've started producing short, accessible guides, and we're working on more resources for when regulated services illegal harms duties begin as well. We want all these resources to be as helpful as they can be. So we're doing research with end users to help shape our services and materials. And if you'd like to participate in this or shape our resources, please do let us know. And again, this will all be in the follow-up email to give you a chance to do so. And you can also in this follow-up email sign up for updates on the regulations, and this will include any future consultations and policy updates. So look out for that in the email. And yeah, just to show you where these summary materials sit on the consultation page, they're just highlighted in yellow there. We've got the summary of our proposals, which is 15 pages, so very accessible. And then the summary of each chapter a bit longer at 39 pages. And that should give a really good overview of everything that the consultation contains. But yeah, just flagging where that sits on the page. And if we go to the next, thank you. And then in terms of how to actually respond, so the summary materials we've mentioned can be used to identify your areas of interest, but the main document will have the detail of the proposals which responses should be based on. We really encourage you to use our web form to respond to the consultation and submit it to the IH consultation inbox, which will again be in this follow-up email with any supporting information or evidence with your response. Using the web form makes it a lot easier for us to process responses we get, and so gives us more time to incorporate these into our decision making. And then the final deadline for responses is 5 p.m. on the 23rd of February in the new year. And then as mentioned, we're running these other 2 webinars in the new year, which we deep dives on different aspects of our proposals. So the risk assessment webinar on the 16th of Jan and the codes webinar on the 18th of Jan as well. So, and then beyond this particular consultation, we recently published our guidance on age assurance and other Part 5 duties on the 5th of December. This is for online service providers that display or publish pornographic content. And as John mentioned as well, so as part of the Act, we've now been given powers to require people to provide us with information that we may need to do our job. And we'll begin to send out formal requests for information and data, which we call information notices, to some services over the next year. So, for example, we expect to send out requests early next year for information about some services and their revenues. This is to inform our approach to charging fees. And we may send requests later in 2024 for any other specific information if we need it to make a decision on our consultation proposals. You must respond if you get a request, but we'll set out what you need to do in the request document itself. Just in terms of what's next. So immediately what's next is that we'll take some questions. We'll also answer some of the questions we received in advance. Thank you for submitting those. Then, as I mentioned, responses to the consultation are due on the 23rd of February. And in the meantime, we are communicating our proposals to a range of public bodies, civil society, services and other organisations, doing some stakeholder engagement. And then finally, as we mentioned, but just to have it on the slide there, we've got the 2 further webinars, the deep dives on the risk assessments and the codes of practice as well, which hopefully you'll be able to attend as well.
Wonderful. Always good to leave thank you up on screen, because we're grateful for your time and attention. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're really appreciative of having so many people attend. Just to flag again, please do visit our website and take a look at the summary documents for the consultation. Please do submit your response via the web form, including any arguments and evidence you'd like to present. And please do join us next time for our 2 webinars in, I think, the 2nd or 3rd week of January. I think from the 15th is when our next one is, focusing on risk assessments. And if you want to subscribe to updates, then you can do that via the online safety pages on our website as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks to everyone for joining us.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.